Greetings to the ASOG Masters in Public Management cohort for this year. I always enjoy going back to Ateneo School of Government to share my experiences. It enables me to refresh my perspectives as well as deepen my MPM learnings. Since my graduation from ASOG, I have been involved in scaled programs, headed development organizations, and delved into complex social issues. I've served as a member of the executive committee in the Lenny 2016 VP campaign, as well as the 2022 Lenny Kiko presidential campaign. This year, as a member of ExCom, I headed the collaterals and materials logistics as well as the HQ. I also headed the billboard activation strategy, and prior to October 2021, I helped co-found Team Lenny Robredo, headed by Jason Gonzalez, then the forerunner of the campaign. TLR is a strong volunteer group that has the biggest network of physical and online volunteers in the campaign. Towards late February this year, I was requested to help the operations strategy head of the clergy campaign or clergy engagement of Kaya Natin Movement for Good Governance and Ethical Leadership, or KN. Let me share with you today how we designed the church activation strategy of the campaign, so I can frame the ethical leadership considerations we can discuss later. As you see in the screen, I'm posing a statement that really illustrates how the church involved itself. You've seen a lot of endorsements from church leaders, but I will try to render to you right now how deep the involvement of the church was. And really, the church could be in a cusp of change due to this involvement in the 2022 campaign. KN, in partnership with Sangguniang Laiko, was tasked to talk to bishops in partnership with the different dioceses to build up the support for the Lenny Kiko campaign. This was headed by Attorney Arnel Casanova. I was tasked to craft and execute the overall engagement strategy. During my first meeting, we reviewed the accomplishments of the team. It was encouraging to see 67% of the bishops we approached supported Lenny. They were in varying degrees, but most of them are verbal. Some had pastoral letter manifestations, and some encouraged their parishes to campaign actively as well. This was very promising. Kaya lang, of the 60% dioceses that expressed support, we also saw only 5% of the parishes engaging. We found that the parish leaders were unaccustomed to political activation. Despite the bishop imprimatur, they were unable to communicate through the political dichotomy in the community. The KN Church engagement team need to establish a simple engagement plan based on practices that the church was already accustomed to. There's the PPCRV module, there are other discernment modules, but we needed to find some practical way to engage the church and move it forward. This strategy needs to have a political activation in mind with clear outcomes. I remember Father Osong of Project 4QC. I observed one of his COPD sessions and saw how this process was very dialogic as opposed to traditional downloading. We immediately adopted this model of political discernment together with other similar programs from Caloocan Diocese. The strategic framework has four blocks or milestones. The strategy was to promote the political discernment circle to enable parishes and communities to actively campaign and distribute sample ballots. Bishop Ambo David once said, "Every election, many of us have been active as poll watchers, but the call of the times is principled politics. We need to be able to encourage the lay to take sides based on principles." The first part of the engagement is the bishop affirmation. The second is the setup of diocese core groups. The third critical milestone is the activation of political discernment circles in parishes and BECs. The fourth is the active campaigning, and later, distribution of sample ballots. It is important to appreciate this as a process-oriented strategy to phase in the involvement of the parish leaders. The engagement is phased within a tight timeline that will coincide with the sample ballot distribution closer to the election. So medyo makitid yung aming timeline. We also had scorecards for the KN teams to focus their efforts through the campaign. The key result areas were formed as milestones with key indicators that serves as guides and targets. As we move towards April, we tightened the engagement process into groups that focus our energies on dioceses and parishes that are almost ready to distribute sample ballots. At the same time, we set up a sample ballot distribution strategy to incorporate the logistical aspects as well. Later, we would revise this grouping to execute the sample ballot distribution. Group 1 engagement level are slow adapter parishes, while Group 2 are fast adapters. The key feature of the discernment circle is the mock election. These mock elections are done twice to let the participants experience the discernment process that is contrasted to decisions based on popularity and name recall. By mid-April, 85 dioceses have publicly supported Lenny Kiko. 25% had point persons and groups tasked to campaign, but have not moved their parishes. Of those that have moved parishes, 62% committed to sample ballot distribution. Only 7% are left in areas that do the direct campaigning, but do not do sample ballot distribution. 4% are left in the discernment circle phase, but are not inclined to active campaigning. We further broke down the focus group 3 intervention into sample ballot distribution modes. Majority of the dioceses sought assistance to distribute. 17 decided to distribute sample ballot themselves. At the same time, we were also working with religious organizations like the BCBP to promote Tapat Dapat. BCBP decided that they cannot endorse candidates, but the whole community decided to strengthen the Tapat Dapat white label campaign. We had an integrated physical and digital campaign at this point. Kaya Natin movement was coordinating the ground game to activate dioceses and parishes. TLR, Team Lenny Robredo, focused on the social media efforts of the church campaign. The third pillar are prayer groups that would stoke the energy of Catholic communities. During this time, we also had clergy communication strategy to match our engagements. Towards the end of April, we had the distribution of sample ballots in full swing. All 85 dioceses agreed to distribute sample ballots. Some had different senatorial candidates. Those that had their own Senate list printed their own sample ballots. We agreed to consolidate our effort under the brand of Simbayanihan. Simbayanihan is a church-led political movement that was started during the 2022 elections with the church and lay leaders of Novaliches and Caloocan. The mission is to advocate lay participation in principled politics and campaigning. The prime movers are Bishop Ambo David, Father Tony Labiao, Attorney Arson Garcia, and Attorney Boc Labastillas. These are some of the Simbayanihan campaigning activities that were taking place in different forms all over the country. There were concerts, house-to-house activities that coincide with the RPC, Lugawan prayer groups, human rosaries, discernment circles, well, the sample ballot campaigning, and even online campaigns. The parish active campaigning efforts of Simbayanihan and sample ballots were executed. In spite of this, there were some apprehensions from the team about the physical distribution. We were worried that some of the parish and lay communities could not deliver for varying reasons. Mostly, we assume this is the first for the most parishes, and the risk for non-delivery would be very high. Kaya we layered in line with this, we layered another network nationwide with the Team Lenny Robredo chapters. There were about 500 chapters that were layered with TLR to coordinate with the church. Altogether, we produced and distributed 35 million sample ballots for the church operations alone. This was separate from the main campaign sample ballots. While we were doing this, we also set up a 24-hour call center and call and monitoring center for the distribution to address bottlenecks and issues in distribution. Unfortunately, the church was unable to deliver enough votes. After the elections, I had the chance to meet with some of the KN leaders, and many of them shared their sentiments from the dioceses that they worked with. Many were shocked to learn their communities were predominantly Marcos supporters. There were some priests who expressed contempt and were requesting to be reassigned to new parishes because they could not manage the divided community. We soon realized that there was a deep problem that the church was now facing. What are the leadership considerations that I have learned from this effort? The first consideration we had was how to scale the Lenny Kiko support within dioceses. We saw the statements of the bishops as strong impetus, but we knew that the church leadership are not trained to lead in a polarized environment. They are used to the opposite of separation of church and state that leaves them disengaged and confused when principled politics are brought forward. For some, they are unable to navigate across the divide because they are not trained. And yet for others, they also have active Marcos supporters in the church that are also critical donors to their finance. We found the COPD to be able to address some of this. First, it enables them to surface the position of the church. Second, it creates a safe platform for them to engage their communities. The COPD is different from the PPCRV in that the COPD sessions let the community actually choose the candidates and encourage them to campaign actively after the session. The second consideration was the local candidate adoption. There were a few parishes that wanted to include local candidates. We encouraged them since this is really a healthy exercise. However, I also cited that it can become more complicated for the parish. A church with local candidate selection can deepen community division. Though this may seem to be a good political exercise, the church leader need to bridge the divides that will be created as a consequence of the partisan exercise. The biggest ethical consideration we saw was this divide that I was talking about in the community, where the leadership is now in question because the parish head took sides. We have church leaders unable to bridge these divides, and some even facing existential questions of relevance. What is our leadership for? Do we still matter? How come we don't have influence in the communities? These are the questions that we have heard. There are leaders and lay, there are church and lay leaders in the community that still want to continue, but they are at a loss on how to do so. The fourth consideration that came up was a briefing with Vivian Tin. Vivian is the president of Inner Sense and is one of those involved in the social intelligence unit of ABS. Vivian outlined a very strong context that also framed the 2022 elections. The first is the COVID lockdown that severed our physical social connections and increased social media use. She illustrated how the telecos declared that the revenue skyrocketed during the COVID lockdown. And this resulted to increased social media use and social media as a primary way to reach out to others. Second, there is a shift in media consumption towards short content. With these two phenomena, this resulted in fragmentation in families and communities. This is a critical context in how we exercise leadership today, which I think many of the leaders, not just the political leaders, need to take into account. After talking to different groups in the campaign, I saw many wanted to continue in some form or another. I realized that VP Lenny became the symbol for political empowerment for non-politicians. She provided a vision and a safe platform for individuals and groups to politically activate and campaign. Come to think of it, it's not safe because the church is really brought to a very difficult question right now and a turning point. She has scaled people power nationwide when it used to be EDSA alone. There are churches and school institutions that have stepped up to campaign and participate in this year's election. Unfortunately, they are also faced with a conundrum. How do we move forward with their leadership in the President Bongbong Marcos era? As a footnote, our conversation with the church leaders in Kaya Natin is still ongoing. We plan to pivot towards good governance and social development as we move forward. We hope the energies of the campaign can continue, not only as kakampink or kakampinks, but a more engaged and inclusive church communities, something that has a longer runway for positive social change. Pope Francis once said, "A good Catholic meddles in politics, offering the best of himself so that those who govern can govern." Perhaps this is a good springboard to realize this for the country and the faithful.